it's me. Hope you're doing good. So today, I want to make a video explaining why you, yes you, the viewer, should study Japanese. Now, I have a feeling that people who are going to be interested in this video and click on this video are people that have thought about studying Japanese before, but are kind of on the fence. Maybe you're an anime fan, or you like Japanese video games, or you have some Japanese friends, and you kind of always thought, well, it'd be cool if I knew some Japanese, but you never really took that first step in learning. So what I want to do today is probably the most important step in language learning, in my opinion, and that is, I want to give you some practical reasons why you should start studying Japanese. So you have all these thoughts in your head, you go back and forth, do you have the time, do you have the ambition? Well, I'm going to give you reasons why you should make the time, and if you do have those ambitions, that you should see them through. So I think the most important thing with language learning is having a reason, having motivation to study that language. If you don't have that, it kind of doesn't matter how hard you study or how good you want to get. You'll kind of just fizzle out and your motivation will dwindle to nothing, and ultimately you'll just stop. So I think I can give a few reasons why you should start studying Japanese today, not only if you're an expat living in Japan, but also if you have no intentions of living in Japan. I think studying Japanese can be a great hobby and a great skill for you to pursue as an individual. So let's go ahead and get started. Here's 5 reasons why you should study Japanese. Reason number 1, maybe you're like me and you had an interest in Japan before you really knew anything about the language. So maybe you've been to Japan, or you think you might want to go to Japan. Well, I can tell you from experience that going to Japan, even just as a tourist, is a completely different experience if you're speaking your own Japanese. Now, it's great to have a tour guide, especially if it's a local tour guide, but they're also quite expensive. And not everyone is fortunate enough to be able to afford those things. On top of that, I think that coming to Japan and making an attempt to speak their own language will really make your experience, even as a tourist in Japan, so much better. When you experience Japan as a foreigner, it will be a completely different experience if you're attempting to speak Japanese. Now, there are a lot of Japanese people that speak English, and you can get around Tokyo and Osaka and the big cities without any Japanese, I think. But in my experience, even when I really didn't speak Japanese very well, I was always very, very warmly welcomed with my attempt. And in a sense, it kind of made it feel like I was experiencing something very different that I wouldn't be able to experience had I just attempted to speak English everywhere. I felt like I was always welcomed, and even my crappy broken Japanese was always received very warmly. And I know that's the Japanese way, but I do think that even just as a tourist, you will find that speaking Japanese, speaking their own language in their own country, will get you a different level of respect and welcome that you wouldn't have otherwise. On top of that, there are so many places in Japan that are just gorgeous with so much nature and so much culture to discover, but they're more countryside, so people don't really speak English. If you have some Japanese experience, then you can come to these places and be able to navigate, ask for directions, stuff like that, no problem. You can explore so much more of Japan if you understand Japanese. Reason number 2, and this is for all my otakus and my nerds and my weebs out there. If you're into Japanese stuff, specifically like manga or anime or games, let me just tell you, it will be so worth it for you to learn Japanese. Just as an example, you see this right here? This guy right here? How much do you think this would cost in USD? I'll look it up. I don't know. But when I was buying manga as an elementary and junior high student, it was like at least $10 a volume. And it's also just kind of really hard to get your hands on. It's not cheap. Whereas here in Japan, it is everywhere. Manga is everywhere. These book offs, you can buy secondhand manga that's in really good condition. You can buy whole sets like this. I mean, I've seen like whole sets of Naruto or Dragon Ball all the way to Dragon Ball Z and all these different sets, and they're extremely cheap. But this cost me, let's see. I bought this, and even though I'm in the middle of reading my Pokemon series right now, Pokémonster Special, even though I'm in the middle of reading that, I bought this, and I bought it, it was 20% off. I think this cost me 10 about $10 USD. It's cheap because it's in Japanese. They print this stuff like, like it's nothing. So, I don't know. So there's stuff like this, and then also for my game nerds, I'm playing through this right now. What is this? Pokemon Green. You can't get this in America. This game never came out in America. It doesn't exist. So stuff like that. And then also, if we're not talking about monetarily, just in other ways that I think it would pay off is that personally, like when I watch anime or something, I find it very, very rewarding when I watch it in Japanese. And even if I have English subtitles, it is so cool to be able to understand the language and the nuances of the language. So I have like some of my favorite lines that I've heard in anime and stuff. And like, yeah, I won't really use that in conversation and stuff, but as like a geek, it's very interesting to me, So I think not only monetarily, but also to enhance your hobby in a sense, to make your hobby that much more enjoyable, studying Japanese would be well worth it for you. Let's go ahead, let's put this guy right here. We're gonna have them chill here for the rest of the video. Okay, reason number 3, and perhaps for me, the biggest reason. And that would be to make Japanese friends. So for me, I'm a huge people person. All the things in my life that are worthwhile for me come from the relationships I have with people. So if you're someone who's a people person, I think studying Japanese would be a great way for you to make new friends and friends that you probably wouldn't make otherwise. Now, of course, this is going to be different for everybody. Those of you who are living in Japan or who want to live in Japan, I would say that even just 100 times more important for you, learning Japanese is your key to getting involved in the community. I can't tell you how many other expats I've met who didn't study Japanese before coming, who say they wish they did after coming here. And it makes sense because you can have your community and like your bilingual Japanese friends or your other expat friends, and that's great. But like living in Japan, wouldn't you want to be involved in the Japanese community? So for me, I know I would not be able to have a lot of the relationships I have if it wasn't for my Japanese skills. So I think making those friends and being able to even date someone who doesn't speak your first language is a huge plus. And those relationships will be a catalyst for your Japanese to improve even more. Now, you might be someone who's not living in Japan, and you might be thinking, well, even if I study Japanese, I won't really get to use it. And I would say that's probably wrong. There are probably more Japanese people living among you than you realize, especially if you're in a city. If you're in a more rural area, you might have to go towards the city, but there are Japanese people all over. If you wanted to study Japanese and you think, oh, I wouldn't be able to use it, I would just go ahead and encourage you and say that's probably not true. There is more than likely a Japanese community around you that you could get involved in, and I'm sure they would love to have you there. So I know for me personally, as a student in Michigan, there's a big Japanese community in Michigan, especially in the Detroit area. I'm from the Detroit area, and I mean, we have a lot of automotive companies, and a lot of those companies are Japanese, or they do business with American companies. And I just think that even if I go back to America, it's clear to me that I can still use Japanese and I can still have relationships with people that I wouldn't be able to have otherwise, perhaps. So even if you don't plan on living in Japan, I think it would be a good idea if you want to branch out and make more friends. Reason number 4, and this is especially for my young people, it looks great on a resume. It looks great on a resume to say you're bilingual. And there are tests and certifications that you can take to where you can actually put this kind of stuff on a resume. Now, if you're not certified in anything, it's kind of hard to say, oh yeah, well I speak Japanese and this and that. It's like, okay, well, you kind of need to be certified, especially if you're someone who, like me, had nothing to do with Japanese outside of my own interest, and then I just decided to study it. You're kind of going to need a certification, but there are certifications that you can get at a low level up to high levels. So it also gives you goals to work towards. Let's say you want to take the JLPT. the Japanese language proficiency test. I always recommend it for people living in Japan or thinking about working in Japan or thinking about putting their Japanese proficiency on a resume. That goes from N5, the easiest level, to N1. So even right from the start, within a couple months or a year, you can have a goal of passing N5 or N4 or N3. And around N3, N2 level is where you can start to really use Japanese in a professional sense if you want. And I think that being bilingual is just a huge advantage as far as job hunting goes, because unlike other studies, being bilingual can usually seep into so many different kinds of work. So you're an engineer, I can almost guarantee you that if you're an engineer that speaks Japanese, you will have a lot more opportunities than someone who doesn't. Or you want to go into media production, or perhaps you want to go into game design. Speaking Japanese is one of those languages that is very sought after, because Japan is, the third largest economy in the world. So studying the language of the third largest economy in the world can only help you. Okay, and then lastly, reason number 5, and perhaps the reason you need to hear the most. Reason number 5 is, it's not as hard as you think. Learning Japanese is not as hard as you think. Just like with anything else in this world, and I learned this the hard way, just like with anything else in this life, in this world, the first 6 months to a year is the hardest part. And that's why you get a lot of people who start and quit. Whether that be martial arts, whether that be language learning, whether that be any other hobby, instrument, guitar, piano, whatever it is. A lot of people start, but they quit within the first 6 months to a year because that's the hardest time. The super beginner stuff, it's like you start and you're like, what the heck am I doing? And you just feel lost all the time. And then you see people who have been at it for a couple of years and you feel insecure. But those are all things that would relate to anything, not just language learning. Yes, it's difficult, but it just takes hard work, right? So it's definitely not impossible. But Japanese is one of those languages where if you look at it, from the outside looking in, having never really attempted, it just looks impossible, And then when you start, it feels impossible. But then when you really get some time and experience under your belt, and you get some good friends and you get some good teachers, you will learn that it is not impossible, and with hard work you can do it. You can get to the point where Japanese is very natural to you, where you will feel comfortable speaking and reading and understanding Japanese. But it does take time. It just takes time and hard work. It's definitely not impossible. So don't let that first big challenge, that first big hump be the reason you don't start. I would always encourage you to start. And because starting is the hardest part. Taking that first step is the hardest part. But I think once you get into it, you will realize that, it's not that overwhelming. It just takes a lot of work and time. Just like anything else that's worth doing in this life, right? So, anyways, I'm thinking about starting up a series of teaching Japanese online, either through individual lessons or also just like classes on YouTube, maybe going through Genki 1 and Genki 2. If any of you out there are interested in that, please let me know, and I will put some time aside to do that. Let me know what you guys think. If you have any questions or anything, if you're an expat or if you're thinking about living in Japan or studying Japanese, hit me up on Instagram or whatever, blah, blah, blah. I'll put everything in the description. God bless you guys. Thanks for watching the video, and I will see you guys soon. Peace out.